I didn't realize how invisible I'd become to my own family until I stood at the edge of that kitchen island, holding an envelope in one hand and a bottle of generic ibuprofen in the other, trying to explain to my mother that I needed help. The kind of help that humbles you, that rots your stomach while you're asking for it, that makes you feel like a burden just for opening your mouth. The kitchen still smelled like reheated lasagna, dry at the edges and too salty, like it always did when Mom was too tired to cook, but still wanted the illusion of a home-cooked meal. She was sitting at the table peeling the sticker off a water bottle, not even really looking at me, like she already knew what I was going to say and had prepared her polite little no in advance. "Mom, I don't know how else to say this," I said, already regretting every second of it. "I need help covering my hospital bills. Look, I'm not asking for everything. Just a little to get through this month." She didn't even raise her head. "We're saving for emergencies," she said, like she was reciting a damn slogan off a bumper sticker. I stood there, stupid and stunned, waiting for the part where she asked what happened. Where she'd reach across the counter and say, "What's going on, Josh? Or at least, are you okay?" But she didn't. Not once did the question leave her mouth. It was like the word emergency was just a placeholder, not a real condition, not something I could be part of. I was 41 years old, had been working construction since I was 19, didn't ask them for a dime when I went through my divorce, didn't move back home when I lost the house, and yet somehow, needing help with medical bills after passing out in a job site bathroom was just a little too much. You ever have someone you love look right through you like you're a stranger selling fake gold on a street corner? That's what it felt like, standing there with that envelope and realizing I was a fucking outsider in my own bloodline. That envelope held the diagnosis, acute pancreatitis. Treatable, thank God, but the meds weren't cheap and the doctor visits kept piling up. I had some savings, but not enough. Insurance didn't cover half the crap it was supposed to, and missing work meant I couldn't make up the difference. I told her all that. At least I think I did. It's a little blurry now, but I remember saying something about being on antibiotics, and she nodded like I'd just told her the sky was blue. Then she asked if I wanted to take some leftover lasagna home. It was the kind of moment you don't come back from. You don't rage or cry or throw a chair, you just go quiet. You pull back. You disappear slowly so no one notices you're gone until they look around and realize they haven't seen you in 6 months. And even then, they'll probably just assume you've been busy. The next morning, I woke up to a group message from Mom. "Excited to celebrate Nate's new home this Saturday. Can't wait to see everyone." Attached were pictures of gold foil balloons that spelled out King Nate, a barbecue menu from some overpriced caterer, and a photo of a jazz band with the caption "Live Music." I stared at it so long my phone screen went dim. Then I opened the envelope from the night before, the one I'd left in my glove compartment, and stared at the word urgent stamped across the top in red ink. I didn't go to work that day. Just sat on the porch with a lukewarm cup of coffee and asked myself how many times I'd been the one they called when something broke or someone needed to be picked up or fixed or covered or carried. I remembered being 16 and selling my guitar so Nate could go to basketball camp. Mom and Dad never paid me back for that, but I didn't care at the time. I was proud. Nate was the golden boy, the one who had potential. I was just solid. Just Josh. Steady Josh. The one who didn't ask for much. But apparently not asking for much becomes your whole personality in this family. And the minute you do, God help you, it's like you've broken a contract you didn't even know you signed. So I didn't respond to the party invite. I didn't reply to the message, didn't call, didn't show up. I didn't even open the damn Facebook event. And the craziest part? No one followed up. Not a single text. Not a "Hey, you coming?" Not a "Everything okay?" Nothing. It's like they'd already decided I wouldn't show, and they were fine with that. The sad truth is, when you stop showing up, you realize who never noticed you were there to begin with. Let me ask you this. Have you ever needed help so badly you choked on the words asking for it, and the people you thought would be there just weren't? What would you have done if your parents turned their backs on you, but handed your brother a throne? The thing that hurt most wasn't the money. It wasn't the medical bills, the pain, or even the rejection. It was the ease with which they moved on to the next celebration while I was trying to keep my body from shutting down. And that's when it hit me this wasn't new. It was just the first time I let myself admit it. The party was just confirmation. Because 7 days after being told there was no money, I saw photos of Nate clinking champagne glasses with our parents under a sign that read, "Welcome home, King." I wasn't angry. Not yet. That would come later. Right then, I was just done. I didn't even have the strength to get up from the bed that day, not because the pain was unbearable, though it had been building in that sharp, gut-twisting kind of way, but because I was so damn tired of pretending I didn't care anymore. My body was slowly catching up to the reality that had been chewing through my spirit for years, and all I could do was lay there, staring at my cracked ceiling, letting the soft hum of the hospital machine still fresh in my memory serve as the day's soundtrack. I had gotten home the night before, sore and stitched up, holding a plastic bag full of prescriptions and discharge papers, and I told myself I'd rest, stay off my feet, hydrate, maybe read something. Instead, I opened my phone and made the mistake of tapping on Facebook. The first video that popped up was Mom's post, uploaded about an hour earlier. It showed Nate stepping out of a sleek black SUV, wearing one of those tailored shirts that hugged his arms just right, with sunglasses on his face, even though it looked like it was pushing 7 in the evening. Everyone clapped as he walked toward the house, his house, one of those tall, modern 2-story homes with fake stone trim and a wraparound porch too clean to ever sit on. The caption read, "So proud of our baby boy. He's worked so hard for this moment." I felt a burning heat rise in my chest that had nothing to do with the stitches in my side. Because I knew damn well Nate hadn't worked for that house, not the way they made it seem. He might have signed the mortgage papers, but Dad covered the down payment and Mom handled the closing costs. Nate had always had a golden staircase built under his feet while the rest of us had to climb with splinters in our palms. Another video played automatically, this one showing the inside of the house. Big white kitchen with granite counters and a marble island, a chandelier the size of a damn satellite dish hanging above a dining table that could have seated a small wedding party. A jazz band played in the corner of the living room while people milled around with cocktails, laughing like this was some kind of Gatsby scene. There was even a little photo booth set up near the staircase with props, plastic crowns, gold chains, fake dollar bills, and a sign that said, "Welcome home, King. King Nate." I lay there in my half-dark room, curtain drawn shut to keep the Indiana heat out, listening to my neighbor mow his lawn as I watched my entire family celebrate someone who hadn't so much as called me in 3 weeks. Not even a text to ask how the hospital went. I watched Dad toast to Nate with a glass of scotch, slurring slightly as he said, "You make us proud, son. You're the future of this family." I don't even think he noticed Mom wiping her eyes in the background, overwhelmed with joy as if her boy had just come home from war instead of just moving 15 minutes up the highway. I didn't even text no thanks when I got the invite. I didn't say I was sick, didn't make an excuse, didn't even ghost with drama. I just vanished, slid out of the group chat like a ghost leaving its body. No announcement. No fireworks. Just silence. And if they noticed, they sure didn't act like it. No one followed up. "No, we missed you at the party." Not even a passive-aggressive comment about my attitude. It was as if I had stopped existing altogether. Laying there that night, flipping through pictures of my brother kissing Mom on the cheek while she beamed like she'd raised a damn astronaut, I felt something shift in me. Not rage, not even jealousy, just this quiet, bone-deep clarity. It had always been this way, ever since we were kids. Nate broke the rules, got grounded for a day, and then was rewarded with pizza the next night. I followed every damn rule, got good grades, helped Dad clean the garage every Saturday morning, and somehow I still ended up the one who was just fine. That was the thing, they always assumed I'd be fine. That I didn't need help because I was the responsible one. But responsibility isn't immunity. It just means you suffer in silence while everyone else gets rescued. I remembered the time in high school when Nate crashed Dad's car after sneaking out with his friends. I was the one who found the busted headlight the next morning and told Dad before he drove it to work. Nate cried, Mom cried harder, and 2 weeks later, he got a newer car as an early graduation gift. I rode my bike to community college and never said a word. Some people think favoritism in a family is loud, extra gifts, constant praise, but sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's the way one person's failures get explained away while another person's pain gets ignored entirely. It's in who gets rescued and who gets asked, "Why didn't you plan better?" That night, while the jazz band played and balloons floated and Nate raised a glass to toast new beginnings, I heated up a can of soup and took my meds with tap water. I didn't even watch TV. Just stared at the ceiling and listened to the sound of my own breath. That was my party. That was my toast. And I realized, for the first time, that I didn't want an apology. I didn't even want to be invited. I just wanted to stop pretending we were all playing the same game. Because if I kept pretending, if I kept showing up to things like that party, I'd just be volunteering to be hurt over and over again. So I disappeared. No show. No call. No more trying. And the thing is, they didn't chase me. They never do. The funny thing about silence is how loud it becomes when there's no one left to argue with, no one to blame, but the ghosts in your head and the versions of yourself you tried to grow out of. In the quiet days that followed the party, I kept thinking back to the years when I still believed the playing field might eventually even out, when I thought maybe, just maybe, if I worked hard enough, showed up consistently enough, swallowed enough pride and bit my tongue at just the right angle, I'd finally earn the kind of warmth they handed to Nate like candy on Halloween. But life doesn't give you points for endurance, especially not in families where love comes in ration servings and second helpings are saved for the favorite son. One memory in particular wouldn't let go of me, and it hit out of nowhere while I was folding laundry at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, trying not to reopen the stitches in my side. I remembered a Christmas morning, must have been 96, maybe 97, when Nate tore through wrapping paper like a squirrel on espresso and unwrapped a PlayStation with 2 controllers and a stack of games so tall he needed both arms to carry it. I got a flannel jacket and a Bible. No lie, just that. Not even a note inside the Bible, just a post-it Mom had stuck on top that read, "Make good choices." I remember looking up at her, waiting for some kind of sign that there was more to come, that maybe the real gift was hidden somewhere like a surprise. But no, that was it. A Bible and a goddamn jacket. Nate was already booting up Tekken by the time I finished unwrapping. I wanted to believe it was an oversight, or maybe they were tight on money, but then 2 days later Dad bought Nate a new pair of basketball shoes because he's got a big game coming up. I'd already been working weekends at the local feed store by then, pulling pallets and stacking hay bales, but somehow that didn't register as impressive. It was just expected of me. Responsibility in my house wasn't rewarded. It was assumed. And if you happened to be born the older one, the one who never broke curfew and didn't flunk algebra, then your prize was a pat on the back and a silent expectation to keep eating whatever was put in front of you. When I was 17, I worked 2 jobs and still managed to graduate on time. Nate, meanwhile, nearly got expelled for selling weed out of his locker, and the worst punishment he got was a stern talk and a new phone because he needed a fresh start. I kept that resentment folded up in the bottom drawer of my life for a long time, never letting it out in daylight because what kind of grown man whines about being treated unfairly as a teenager? But now, with a healing scar down my left side and a house echoing with absence, that drawer was wide open and everything in it was spilling out. The worst part wasn't even the memories themselves. It was realizing how much I'd bent myself to be palatable, to be useful, to be easy to love. And still, I had come up short. A few days after the party, Maggie came by to drop off groceries and check on me. She's 18 now, sharp in all the ways I never was at that age, with her mother's intelligence and my cynicism. She walked in, saw the mess of medicine bottles on the counter, and sighed in that way teenagers do when they're trying not to seem worried. "You okay, Dad?" she asked, sitting on the edge of the armchair, her legs crossed under her like a kid. "Getting there," I said, which was my standard line by now. She didn't press, just nodded and stared out the window for a second, like she was building up to something. Then she said it soft, but with just enough sting to land. "Grandma posted a bunch of pictures from the party. Again. I guess they really like that Nate moved into a real home, huh?" I looked at her, trying to read her tone. It wasn't bitter, exactly. Just observant. And that hurt more. She wasn't angry. She was just used to it. Even she could see the divide, and she hadn't even been born when most of it started. "I know they love you," she said, as if that settled anything. "Do they?" I asked. Not sarcastic. Not cruel. Just honest. She didn't answer right away, just kind of pressed her lips together, then got up to start putting away the groceries. "I think they do," she said finally, carefully. "But it's like they only know how to love Nate loud. With you, it's always in whispers." I had to turn away at that point, not because I was ashamed to cry in front of my daughter, but because I didn't want her to feel like she'd said something wrong. She hadn't. She'd just hit a truth that had been sitting in my ribs for 4 decades, waiting for someone else to notice it. That night, after she left, I pulled out a photo album from the hallway closet. One of those big leather-bound ones Mom used to keep meticulously, with plastic sleeves and little labels written in her curling cursive. I flipped through the pages like I was checking the history of a stranger's life. Birthday parties, soccer games, Easter egg hunts, Nate in the center of every shot, arms around relatives, face lit up like a damn commercial. I was there too, of course. Off to the side. Holding the dog. Carrying chairs. Always in the frame, but never the focus. And that's when I realized something that changed the way I looked at everything. It wasn't that I wasn't loved, it's that I was never seen. There's a difference. Love, in theory, can be given out of obligation. But being seen, really seen, means someone notices your weight in the room, remembers what hurts, asks questions without being prompted. I had lived my whole life inside a family that loved me the way you love the walls of a house. You appreciate the support, but you never stop to really look. The next morning, my phone buzzed. It was Mom. Just a simple message. "We miss you. Can we talk?" I stared at the text for a long time, not angry, not even surprised. Just tired. Because I already knew what was coming. A dinner. A talk. A dozen ways to say, "Let's move on," without ever really saying, "I'm sorry." Still, I texted back. "Yeah, let me know when." Because sometimes, even ghosts get hungry. It was one of those nights where the air felt too still, like even the weather had the decency to hold its breath, while the family pretended nothing was broken, nothing needed fixing, nothing had cracked straight through the foundation months ago. They picked a steakhouse off the interstate, one of those places with fake leather booths and waiters dressed in matching aprons who smiled too hard and asked how your day was like they gave a damn. I hadn't even wanted to go, but I said yes, because that's what you do when your mother calls and says she misses you in that tight, rehearsed voice that leaves no room for escape without sounding cruel. I arrived second, just after Dad and before Nate, which meant I had exactly 6 minutes of awkward silence to sip my water while my parents made small talk about highway construction and the rising price of eggs, as if we were strangers waiting for a 4th player at a poker table. Mom kept smoothing her napkin across her lap like it would reveal the right thing to say if she folded it enough times. Dad looked tired in that way he always did, stiff posture, jaw locked, arms crossed like he was still guarding something worth protecting. But there was no tension in their voices. No real concern. Just that Midwest politeness, that icy civility that families like mine mistake for peace. Then Nate walked in, loud and unbothered as ever, wearing a button-down that probably cost more than my last medical bill and cologne strong enough to make the air shift. He slapped Dad on the back, kissed Mom on the cheek, and gave me a nod like we were old coworkers at a reunion, not brothers caught in the middle of a Cold War. He ordered the ribeye without looking at the menu, asked for the bourbon list, and talked about real estate like he was prepping for a podcast. I sat there, letting the conversation happen around me like I was visiting a museum dedicated to people who used to know me. Mom laughed too loudly at Nate's jokes, and Dad kept pretending to check the time like he had somewhere else to be. I waited for anyone, to bring it up, to mention the reason we were even pretending to share a meal again, to ask how I was doing or how recovery had gone or why I'd vanished like a ghost after the party. But they didn't. Of course they didn't. They waited for me to crack first. They always do. So I did. I set my fork down, leaned back in my seat, and said it plainly. You know what's funny? I asked you for help with my actual health, and you told me you were saving for emergencies. Then a week later, Nate gets a damn jazz band and a catered party. The air didn't move. Not for a second. Not even the waiter came by. Mom blinked like she hadn't heard me right. Dad stared at the condensation on his glass. And Nate? Nate laughed. Not a big laugh, not a cruel one, just that smug little chuckle he always had when he was caught red-handed and knew the punishment wouldn't come. Man, he said, grinning like I was overreacting, you could have just asked me. I would have helped if you'd come to me directly. That was the moment I knew we weren't going to make it out of that steakhouse as the same family. Because the words didn't sting, they infuriated. Like he thought what I needed was a goddamn loan, like I was too proud to ask him, the baby brother who never paid back a cent to anyone in his life. He wasn't offering compassion. He was offering charity wrapped in ego. You don't get it, I said, quieter now, like maybe volume was the only thing holding back the truth. I wasn't just asking for money. I was asking to be seen. And all I got was silence. Mom started to speak, something soft and trembling like, that's not fair, but I didn't let her finish. I turned to Dad, not expecting much, but still hoping for something resembling a spine. You never even asked what was wrong with me, I said. You didn't care enough to ask. He cleared his throat and looked like he might finally say something that mattered, but all he gave me was this half-mumbled line, so quiet, I almost missed it, but I'll never forget it. Don't ruin this family over a few hospital bills. That's what he said. Like the real problem wasn't abandonment or favoritism or 40 years of biting my tongue, just the audacity I had to speak out about it. Like the family was still whole, and I was the one breaking it by pointing out the cracks. I stood up, didn't yell, didn't flip the table, just left my half-eaten steak bleeding on the plate and walked out the front door without a coat. I heard Mom call after me, something panicked and wet, but I didn't turn around. Couldn't. Because if I did, I might have said things I wouldn't come back from. Outside, the night was sharp and too quiet. I lit a cigarette I'd sworn I quit last year, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything. Not an explanation. Not a smile. Not another fake family dinner where I was expected to play the role of the grateful son who never needed too much. They stayed inside. Probably split dessert. Probably tried to smooth it over the way they always do, with silence, with deflection, with pretending the explosion never happened. But something did happen, and I wasn't going to be the one sweeping up the glass this time. The dinner didn't just go badly. It didn't get out of hand or go too far. It broke everything. Or maybe it revealed that everything had already been broken, and I was just the only one who finally stopped pretending the pieces still fit. And I knew, without a doubt, that next time they called, I wasn't answering with yes. Maybe I wouldn't answer at all. The voicemail came late on a Sunday evening, sometime after the sun dipped down behind the neighbor's roofline and left the living room bathed in the blue glow of the muted television. I'd been sitting there, half watching a rerun of some game show I didn't care about, trying to ignore the emptiness that had settled into the house like a second skin. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, and I didn't recognize the number at first, probably because I hadn't saved it. I knew it was Mom the second I heard the tone of her voice, syrupy sweet but lined with that cracked glass edge she always used when she was trying to seem concerned without admitting she was the one who broke something. "Hi," "Sweetheart," the message began, already trying to manipulate me with a word she hadn't used since I was 13. "We've been thinking about you. I know things got heated the other night, and I just wanted to say we love you, and we don't want this little misunderstanding to tear the family apart. Maybe we didn't handle everything the right way, but you know your father and I have always done our best. Can we just put all this behind us and move forward as a family again? We're not getting any younger, and I'd hate for this to linger." She didn't say sorry. Not once. Not even close. There was no mention of what I'd said at the table, no acknowledgement of the hurt or the neglect or the fact that they'd outright dismissed my pain like it was just a scheduling conflict. She called it a misunderstanding, like I had shown up at the wrong restaurant by mistake instead of walking into a fire they pretended wasn't burning. That was her way, make everything sound smaller than it is, push it back under the rug, let it rot underneath, and call it tradition. I didn't respond. I didn't even save the message. I listened to it twice, just to be sure I hadn't missed anything, any flicker of real emotion, any attempt to own what had been said. But there was nothing. Just her voice, floating through the speaker like a ghost trying to rewrite its own haunting. Then I pressed delete. It had been years since I'd seen Lisa, but I called her the next day. Maybe I was desperate for a voice that wouldn't try to guilt me into silence. Maybe I just needed to be reminded that someone else had once seen me clearly, even if it didn't last. She agreed to meet for coffee without hesitation, and it was strange how natural it felt walking into that little corner cafe and seeing her already at the table, sipping from a chipped ceramic mug like no time had passed at all. Lisa looked the same, just older in a graceful way, like life had softened her around the edges, but hadn't dulled the fire in her eyes. She stood when I approached, gave me a short hug that didn't pretend to fix anything, and sat back down with a sigh that told me she already knew why I was there before I said a single word. "I got into it with them," I said, not even bothering to ease into the conversation. "It finally happened. I said the stuff I should have said 20 years ago, and now I'm the villain." She didn't blink. Just stirred her coffee and waited. "They invited me to dinner," I continued, acted like everything was fine. "Nate joked about bailing me out. Dad told me not to ruin the family over medical bills, and Mom, she left me a voicemail after. All guilt, no ownership." Lisa set down her spoon and looked at me the way she used to when I got stuck in my own head, the way she did when we were married and I'd shut down for days at a time, too proud to admit I was hurting. "They didn't fail you recently," she said, voice soft but deliberate. "They just finally showed you who they really are." The words hit so hard I had to look away. Not because they shocked me, but because they felt like a door slamming open inside my chest. Lisa had always had that kind of clarity, even when we couldn't make it work. She could see the shape of things I was too deep inside to recognize. And she was right. This wasn't new. This wasn't some recent fracture that could be patched with apologies and dinners and voicemail peace offerings. This was a long unraveling, finally reaching the end of the thread. "They think I'm overreacting," I said, my voice lower now, like I was confessing something shameful. "Like I'm throwing a tantrum because they didn't make me the guest of honor at the party." "Because that's easier for them," Lisa replied. "It's easier to make you the problem than to admit they've been playing favorites your whole life." I nodded, staring at the black ring left by her mug on the table. "I feel crazy," I said finally. "Like maybe I'm remembering it wrong, or maybe I'm being too sensitive, or maybe you're not crazy," she cut in, gently but firmly. "You're just not willing to ignore it anymore. And that's scary for them. Because if you don't play along, the whole script falls apart." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Maybe both. For so long, I'd convinced myself that if I just kept the peace, if I showed up to holidays and stayed quiet during the speeches and sent polite thank yous for the socks and cologne they gave me every year, that eventually I'd get a seat at the real table. But now I saw the truth, it was never about earning my place. The table was built for someone else, and I'd just been eating scraps off the edge like that was love. We didn't stay long. Lisa had things to do, and I didn't want to pretend this was some nostalgic reunion. But before we parted, she touched my arm and said one last thing I've carried with me since. You don't have to go back to that version of yourself, Josh. Not for them. Not for anyone. When I got home that night, the house felt different. Not warmer. Not quieter. Just mine. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The voicemail was gone. So was the guilt. Some things don't need a reply. The letter came out of me like a fever, sudden and raw, scrawled in my barely legible handwriting on the back of an old utility bill envelope, because I couldn't find actual stationery and didn't feel like waiting long enough to go buy some. It wasn't a letter I ever planned to send, and I think that gave me a strange kind of freedom, the freedom to be honest, even brutal, without worrying about how they'd twist my words into guilt or silence or something more palatable to their ears. I didn't write to accuse or demand or beg for anything. I wrote because I needed to hear the truth outside of my own head, needed to read it with my own eyes, so I could finally stop spinning around in the same circle of doubt and longing I'd lived in for over 40 years. I wrote about Christmas mornings when Nate's name was on every shiny box and mine was scribbled on a card taped to a department store sweater. I wrote about the time I came home with a bloody nose from standing up to a bully and Dad told me to stop causing trouble while Nate got praised for winning a fight 2 weeks later. I wrote about birthdays that felt like afterthoughts, about late nights working 2 jobs while they asked if I could help cover Nate's car insurance again, just until he gets back on his feet. I wrote about being tired. Not angry, not even resentful, just tired. And then I folded the letter, set it on the counter, and stared at it for 2 full hours without moving. Eventually I slid it into a drawer, underneath old coupons and pens that didn't work, because I knew what would happen if I sent it. They'd call me dramatic. They'd ask why I was bringing up the past, or tell me how much they'd tried, how much they loved us both equally, and I'd be sucked back into that endless game of proving my pain to people who refused to see it. So I didn't send it. I left it there like a buried artifact, something future archaeologists might find if they ever cared enough to dig through the wreckage. A few days later, I drove past the old neighborhood, not really intending to stop, just feeling a pull I hadn't felt in years. The streets looked smaller now, the trees taller, the sidewalks cracked and unpatched, but the house itself still stood like a frozen version of time I'd tried to outgrow. White shutters faded to beige, the same dent in the garage door where Nate once backed into it and never got blamed. I parked across the street and just watched for a while, waiting for something to hit me, nostalgia, anger, regret, but all I felt was distance. Like I was staring at a place I used to know in another life. I walked up to the porch, not to knock, but because I remembered there was a loose board near the 3rd step, and sure enough, it was still there. Untouched. Unfixed. A tiny wound in the house no one had ever bothered to repair. That was the part that got me, not the memories, not the ghosts, but how little had actually changed. Later that night, Maggie stopped by again, unannounced like always, carrying a bag of takeout and a look that said she'd been reading too much into my silences again. She was good at that, reading me, I mean. Better than I ever gave her credit for when she was younger. "You okay, old man?" she asked, setting the food down without waiting for an answer. I told her I was fine, of course. But she didn't buy it, also of course. After dinner, we sat out back on the porch steps, the summer air thick and humming with cicadas, and I finally told her what I'd done. About the letter. About the visit. About the drawer full of unsent words. She listened quietly, like she always did, letting the weight of it settle before she responded. "You know," she said finally, "you're nothing like them. And that's the best part." I looked at her then, really looked, and realized she meant it not as a comfort, not as some throwaway line, but as a truth she'd carried long before I had the courage to say it out loud. It hit me hard in the chest, because I realized that maybe I hadn't failed as much as I thought. Maybe, in stepping away from the people who made me feel small, I'd actually built something bigger, something real. Later that night, I found myself digging through an old box in the hall closet, One of those plastic bins filled with childhood clutter that I kept meaning to throw out but never quite could. Among broken crayons and faded report cards, I found a drawing, simple, crooked lines and stick figures, the kind of thing a first grader makes with more heart than skill. At the bottom, in loopy teacher handwriting, was a note. Josh, invisible but strong. I sat there holding that paper like it was a map to a country I'd forgotten existed. Invisible but strong. That was how they'd seen me even then. Not neglected, not forgotten, but just assumed to be okay. The kind of kid you don't worry about because he doesn't cry as loud or fall apart in front of you. The kind of boy you praise for being independent while never asking what that independence is costing him. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just folded the paper and tucked it into the drawer with the letter. Maybe someday Maggie will find them both and understand a little more about where I came from, about why I chose distance over tradition, clarity over closeness. Because the truth is, I don't want revenge or apologies or some dramatic confrontation that ends in tears and hugs. I want peace. I want honesty. I want a life where I don't have to question whether the people around me are clapping because I'm winning or because I'm finally entertaining them. And if that means walking away, if that means letting the silence stretch out like a long road with no end, then so be it. I'd rather have the truth than keep begging for love that only comes when it's convenient. I'd rather have nothing than pretend this was ever something whole. The flowers arrived on a Tuesday morning that smelled like burnt toast and old regrets, a day like any other. Except for the oversized delivery van parked outside my house and the stranger at my front door holding a bouquet so large it looked like someone had robbed a wedding. I didn't open the door right away. I watched from behind the curtain, wondering for a moment if maybe Maggie had done something thoughtful again, or if Lisa had decided to reach back into the past one last time. But the delivery guy knocked twice and left the bouquet on the welcome mat, along with a little envelope tucked neatly into the plastic wrap. I didn't have to open the card to know where it came from. That particular brand of artificial reconciliation had my mother's fingerprints all over it. I stood there for a long while, just staring at the bundle of white lilies and pale roses like they were some kind of ghost offering, like the smell alone was supposed to wash away decades of being second choice, background noise, and family wallpaper. Eventually, I opened the envelope, even though I knew I shouldn't have. Curiosity is a dangerous thing when you're trying to stay free. Inside was a plain card with gold script across the front that said thinking of you, like this was just some casual check-in and not the follow-up to a full-scale emotional implosion. The handwriting inside was hers, perfect cursive, overly rounded letters like someone who never quite got over high school calligraphy class. Let's not let pride get in the way of love, it read. We're still your family. Love, Mom and Dad. No apology. No acknowledgement of what happened at the steakhouse. No mention of the years before that, the silences, the favoritism, the fact that when I needed them most they offered nothing but cold comfort and a lecture about not causing drama. Just that single sentence, wrapped in guilt and dipped in sentimentality, like a pretty coat of paint over a crumbling wall. I didn't bring the flowers inside. I picked them up by the plastic stems, walked them back to the florist address on the tag, just 6 blocks away, and returned them without a word. The girl behind the counter looked confused, like she didn't understand why someone would return something so beautiful. I didn't explain. Just handed her the bouquet and walked back out, feeling lighter with every step. That night, just as the sun dipped behind the line of trees in my backyard and the air started to cool, my phone buzzed with a message I felt before I even saw it. Nate. Of course it was him. The message was short, like most of his were, dripping with that casual, confident cruelty only someone who's never had to earn a damn thing can pull off without thinking. You're being dramatic. Mom's trying. Just move on already. That was it. No questions. No care. No curiosity about what I might be feeling or why I hadn't responded. Just a direct jab meant to put me back in my place, as if I was the one throwing tantrums and rewriting history just because I had the audacity to demand something more than silence and second-hand affection. I stared at the screen for a long minute, feeling that familiar fire crawl up my spine, the one that always comes right before you break your own rule and respond to someone who doesn't deserve it. But I didn't take the bait this time. I didn't craft a comeback or try to make him understand or throw my pain back at him like a weapon. I just opened his contact, hovered over it for a beat, and hit block without a shred of hesitation. It didn't feel like victory. It didn't feel like some dramatic declaration. It felt like closing a window that had been letting in cold air for far too long. A few days passed in the kind of quiet that's only noticeable once you've cut off the noise. I started sleeping better, eating regularly, listening to music again without flinching every time my phone buzzed. I stopped checking social media for updates on family I no longer considered emotionally accessible. The air felt different, like I'd finally stepped outside after being trapped in a house full of smoke. And then the phone rang. It was Dad's number, and I didn't answer. A minute later, Mom's number called, and again, I let it ring out. Then came a text from Lisa, short and soft but serious. "Did you hear? Jerry passed." Jerry, a name that hit like a cold slap. Jerry was my father's oldest friend, a man who had known me since I was in diapers, a man who fixed my first bicycle and who taught me how to check oil and change a tire when Dad was too busy watching Nate's baseball games to bother. He'd been more of a consistent male presence in my life than my own father ever managed. And now he was gone. The funeral was Saturday. I sat on the edge of my bed that night, holding that little folded letter I'd written weeks ago, the one I still hadn't sent, and I wondered if this was the thing that would pull me back in. If death was enough to justify showing my face, standing beside people who'd only recently decided I was worth remembering again, even if just for appearances. I thought about Jerry's laugh, the way he used to call me kiddo even when I was 30, the way he always noticed when I was hurting, even if he didn't know what to say. And I thought about the look on my mother's face the last time I saw her, the way she blinked when I finally said what I'd been holding in for decades, like she hadn't expected me to ever speak that loudly in her presence. I thought about Nate's smug little text, the flowers on my porch, the note wrapped in guilt and dipped in artificial sweetness, and I wondered if showing up now would feel like betrayal, not of them, but of myself. I didn't answer their calls. I didn't respond to the text. I didn't say whether I was coming or not. I just sat in the dark, phone in my hand, silence all around me, and let the weight of that hollow apology settle into the room like dust no one ever bothers to clean. Some gestures come too late. Some wounds go too deep. And sometimes, what they call love is just control in prettier packaging. Saturday was coming, and I knew they'd expect me to show up. But expectation doesn't mean obligation. And I wasn't sure anymore if closure was something I even needed. The morning of the funeral arrived dressed in gray, skies sagging with low clouds that threatened rain but never quite delivered, the kind of weather that makes everything feel heavier even if nothing has changed. I hadn't told anyone I was coming, not even Lisa, not even Maggie, because I didn't want advice or encouragement or that gentle nudge people give you when they think you might back out of doing something important. I didn't want anyone else's version of what I owed to the dead or the living. I wanted to decide for myself, quietly, whether I had one more step left in me toward a family that had only ever turned around when it was too late. I drove slow, not because I was uncertain, but because part of me hoped I'd miss the whole thing, pull into the gravel lot just in time to see everyone leaving, nod to a few familiar backs, and slip away again without being seen or required to speak. I wore a dark gray suit that hadn't seen daylight since my divorce, and it didn't quite fit right around the shoulders anymore, too tight in places and too loose in others, like it remembered a version of me that no longer existed. I didn't bring flowers, didn't write a note, didn't even look up the obituary. All I had was the knowledge that Jerry was gone and that some part of me still needed to say goodbye, even if no one else would hear it. The chapel was smaller than I remembered, one of those old buildings with wooden pews that creaked under even the slightest weight, stained glass windows that let in muted colors like someone was filtering the world for sensitivity, and that thick, padded smell of old books and colder regrets. I slipped in through the side door, barely a minute after the service started, and stayed in the back row, behind a column that gave me partial cover without fully hiding me. I told myself it was about privacy, about space, but the truth was, I wasn't ready to be seen. Not by them. Not today. Up front, the family sat in a neat, curated row. My parents were there, of course, dressed in dark blues and blacks, heads bowed just enough to look respectful but not enough to hide their discomfort. Nate sat at the end, legs crossed, his arm resting on the back of the pew like it was his living room couch. They looked the way they always did, presentable, controlled, curated for the eyes of everyone around them. I watched them the way you watch strangers in a play, familiar faces reading from a script you never agreed to, performing grief like an obligation. And then I saw it, my mother, scanning the room slowly, turning her head just enough to look past the aisle, past the row behind her and back toward the entrance. Her eyes moved like someone who was searching without wanting to seem like she was searching, and I recognized that look instantly. Not panic. Not desperation. Just that mild anxiety that comes from realizing someone who should be there maybe isn't. She didn't spot me. Or if she did, she didn't let on. The eulogy was kind and clean, full of sweet memories and sanitized truth, the kind of speech people give when they don't want to upset anyone, even the dead. I listened, but not really. My focus drifted in and out, the words blurring behind the sound of a ticking wall clock somewhere behind me and the soft rustling of tissue paper from a woman in the third pew. And through it all, I kept waiting for the moment that would pull me forward, the tug in my gut that would say, "Go up there, say something, be seen." But it never came. Because that tug, that instinct to fix things, to prove something, to demand space in rooms where I was never invited to sit, ID finally let it die. So I stayed in my seat, quiet, still, present but unannounced, the kind of presence that lives only in memory and missed opportunities. After the final prayer and the awkward shuffling of feet, the family made their slow, practiced exit, shaking hands with old friends, receiving hugs from people who hadn't seen them since the last funeral or maybe a wedding no one really wanted to attend. I slipped out the side door before the line reached the back, and I walked straight to my truck, parked under a half-dead tree in the far corner of the lot where no one would think to look. I sat in the cab, engine off, watching through the windshield as they spilled out of the chapel like people leaving a theater, their masks half-dropped, but not forgotten. Mom clutched her purse too tightly, Dad shook hands like a man collecting political favors, and Nate, God bless him, lit a cigarette the second they crossed the street, laughing at something I couldn't hear. Like it was just another Saturday and the man who'd practically raised me hadn't just been lowered into the ground. They stood around for a while, chatting in little groups, patting each other's backs, telling stories that probably made Jerry out to be cleaner and sweeter than he really was, the way we all do when someone's gone. And through the rearview mirror, I saw one final detail that stuck with me longer than it should have. They passed right by the back pew where I'd been sitting. They passed right by the side door. They walked to the car, smiling and relaxed, Nate still laughing as if the hardest part of the day was deciding where to eat afterward. And that was it. That was the last image I got of them, not grieving, not broken, not even curious. Just moving on. I didn't start the engine right away. I sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring through the glass like I might still find a reason to get out and say something. Something kind. Something final. Something healing. But nothing came. And maybe that was the point. I could have gone up. I could have said something. But maybe some things are better left unsaid. They wonder why I never show up. The truth is, I already did. They just weren't looking.